What's up, everybody? My name is Hussam Patel, and I'm with my co-host today, Brandon Ligouri. Brandon, how you doing today, bud?
Happy Saturday, gentlemen. Another week of talking about college football. There's a bunch of games really to dive in, and I'm looking forward to it.
Of course. And I know last week we were off. I was busy. You were busy as well. But, I mean, last week's games were just insane. Number 2, Iowa went down at home to unranked Purdue. And look, Riley Moss's absence was felt by the Hawkeyes, and the Boilermakers took a huge advantage of that. But before we really dive deep into last week's review and today's preview, I wanted to introduce our special guest today, Joe DeLeone. Joe, how you doing today?
Good. It's a little early on my end, but I'm always excited to talk college football. I'll hop in whenever. And thanks for having me on, Hussam and Brandon.
Of course, Joe. And let us know, what you do, basically on the college football end of things.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of different hats that I wear. My main job is I'm a producer with the Believe Podcast Network, and we produce a lot of really good shows with former athletes. Like our for college, our biggest one that we do is Matt McGloin and Tom Hannafin. Matt McGloin, former Penn State quarterback. I work a lot with them. But in terms of my stuff that I do, I'm an FCS football analyst. Back when I was playing, I started the FCS football podcast with Believe, and I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I cover the FCS super closely, kind of giving people the perspective of some of these smaller schools, these small school prospects. That then kind of opened the door for the show that I do with Ryan Roberts and Alex Gilstrap, and Sam helps us out a ton with our social media. And we do the Believe in NFL Draft Prospects podcast covering the NFL draft, and we get to interview a ton of great NFL draft prospects. And also share our takes on some of those various players. I'm not as much of a draft analyst as Ryan and Alex are, which I think we're going to end up covering based on the pick that I made in our mock draft. But I always love to stir the pot. That's all I can say.
Of course, and Joe does stir the pot. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And yeah, I work with Joe at NFL Draft at the NFL Draft Prospects podcast, as well with Alex and Joe. But Alabama bounced back last week, and Brandon, Georgia, their defense is just swarming. Like, I would be afraid to play against it. What did you think in their, dominant game against Kentucky?
Everybody was obviously looking forward to this game because these were two SEC teams coming in, both ranked, both undefeated. And, really, Georgia is just continuing to show why they're the best team in the nation. Georgia's continuing to show why they're their current number one ranked team. And me being a Florida Gators fan, knowing that we have a bye week this week, next week, a day before Halloween, the annual Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville, I'm very, very worried because, again, Georgia's defense, it's like the 80s Chicago Bears. It's literally it's playing up to that par. And if you watch that Georgia defense, the first name that really attracts me the most has to be linebacker and Kobe Dean, who's literally playing as one of the top-rated linebackers, probably going to go off the board early this upcoming April of 2022. Joe, really, when you watch this Georgia, you even not only can you really take a look at their past game against Kentucky, what about even Arkansas when, a lot of experts thought maybe that was going to be a close game. I believe Arkansas got shut out that game.
Yeah, this Georgia defense is on like an unprecedented rate, and offensively they don't do really a lot to scare you, but their defense is so far above any other team and what they're able to compete with them. You mentioned Nakobe Dean. Adam Anderson also has been fantastic so far this year, and he's probably going to get drafted really highly. I could probably sit here for 5 minutes, keep rattling off different names that they have on that defense, but they just have a lot of really talented 4-star, 5-star guys that are playing up to a really, really good scheme. And Kirby Smart, we know, is a smart defensive coach. He's got these guys rallying. He's got them fighting. I really don't see much of a chink in their armor. That is going to be a team that whoever they face in the playoff, when they face, if it's Alabama in the SEC championship game, and whoever they face potentially in the national championship, they're going to need to be perfect if they want to move the ball against them.
And of course,
go ahead.
You gotta I know Oklahoma, they're always within the college football playoffs, and Georgia, I believe, is number 1. If it does come down to Georgia and Oklahoma, let's say the playoffs started now. If it came down to Georgia and Oklahoma, the Sooners are inching back towards maybe, I guess, national championship title hopes, thanks to Caleb Williams. Could Caleb Williams potentially upset this Georgia team if it came down to it?
Well, you look at the problems that they were having before, and yeah, you can pinpoint those issues on a lack of consistency from Spencer Rattler. As soon as Caleb Williams comes in, they're a lot more explosive. They've put up a lot more points, a lot more yards. The thing that worries me in a situation like this is, one, by the time the end of the season comes around and they play them either in the first round or the second round of the college football playoff, Caleb Williams is still not going to have that many games in under his belt, and he's a true freshman or a redshirt. He's a freshman regardless. He does not have a lot of playing time. Yeah, he looked amazing against Texas, who is always going to be overrated, and TCU is not that great compared to who they're going to have to face in the final stretch of the season. Playing against a Georgia team that we're hyping up here, that is going to be a very, very difficult task for a freshman. Any player that does not have a lot of playing time is going to be a sitting duck. He very well could. It could be a game where we all get hyped up and say that, oh yeah, Caleb Williams is the guy that's going to do it. But in reality, their offensive line, I don't know how well that they could really match up with that Georgia front. And I just don't think that a young guy like Caleb Williams can really keep up in a situation like that.
I think you got to talk about the last 2 crazy games. At just the Ole Miss Tennessee game put all of Knoxville on a tilt where golf balls were thrown onto the field and a bottle of mustard, which, I mean, if you have half a brain, didn't really have mustard in it as well. And then, not to mention, App State upsetting undefeated number 14 Coastal Carolina. I mean, Joe, as a small school with aspirations of possibly getting into either the college football playoffs or one of the top bowl berths, this has to be an absolute heartbreaker for the Chanticleers.
Yeah, that was one of those teams that they're fun. It's cool to see, and they're in the Sun Belt and they're competitive, but they had no shot. If they ran the table, their strength of schedule is in the hundreds. It's one of the worst strength of schedules in the country. The playoff committee is going to take that stuff into account. They're just not going to get that opportunity, even if they went undefeated. Cincinnati has a little bit more to prove, and they've definitely done so, beating Notre Dame. Indiana's not as good as we thought, which is why they're in the conversation, and they've got the players to compete. They've got some 4-star guys. They've got some talented recruits. But for the Chanticleers, you're talking about that Wednesday night game. App State's a good football team, and it's what the Fun Belt is going to turn into, which is a lot of good teams at the top. There's going to be a lot of fighting. I think it's going to be a lot of similar records going forward. We're probably not going to get an undefeated team again like we had last year, now that the scheduling is back to normal. But the Sun Belt is going to be fun with Coastal Carolina, with App State. We're supposed to be adding JMU, which is an FCS program, and all these other schools. But yeah, it is definitely disappointing to see that they, for their perspective, to not finish their undefeated streak out.
Well, let's go ahead and check out this week's slate of game, and we're going to start off with Wisconsin and Purdue. Right now, the line is Wisconsin, I believe, -2.5 or -3.5, and the over/under is 40. Now, look, their defense with Jack Sanborn, Leo Chenal is lights out, and the Badgers' offense owes them a victory. Will this be the game where they have an offensive dominance against the Boilermakers today?
Definitely not. If this is a game for them to get into rhythm, it's not going to be against Purdue. We saw the defensive capabilities of Purdue last week. They've got a lot of quality players, but you have to mention a player that is going to be in consideration for all of the defensive awards and also a top 5 pick in George Karlaftis. He was unblockable, it felt like, against Iowa. And Iowa has a good offensive line. Wisconsin does not have as good of an offensive line, even close to what Iowa has. Karlaftis is probably going to have a really good day today. And even if they triple team him, they've got other guys that are that are capable of getting off and making some plays. This Purdue defense is the reason why that they've had success. I'm more worried offensively. And if you're considering even betting anything here, the over might be something that you key in on, because this could be a very low-scoring game. Graham Mertz has been terrible, and that offense has not been good for Wisconsin. At the same time, Purdue's using 2 quarterbacks right now. The only good player that I can really point to is David Bell. It's probably going to be very, very low scoring.
And look, David Bell, he's had 4 100-yard receiving games in 5 outings. And he all but ruined Iowa's season last week with 11 catches, 204 yards, and a score. Now he's going to test this Badgers secondary, who they're really young. So can that secondary, particularly, who do you think will step up to minimize David Bell's impact today?
Well, they're definitely going to need somebody to step up. And Iowa's secondary, as we know, had a lot of really talented players. A lot of people were saying that Iowa had the best secondary in the Big Ten and even in the country, possibly. They were dealing with some injuries, and those injuries really killed them trying to match up with David Bell. I don't even know if I can really pinpoint anyone who can match up with David Bell. It's going to be a really, really tough day for them if they're not fully prepared. We know that Wisconsin is consistently a good defensive team, so they might be able to knock them out a little bit, but it's going to be a rough day, I think, for Wisconsin.
So Purdue doesn't run the ball that well, and even though it controls the clock, it's not going to win the time of possession battle against Wisconsin today, and that's just one of my predictions, which is why I have Wisconsin winning 20-14. But I know a player that Ryan interviewed in the podcast we're on with Jalen Alexander. I mean, that guy is an absolute dude. Do you think he might be the key in possibly grabbing a couple of turnovers to maybe change the tide of the game for the Boilermakers?
Yeah, Alexander has been a really underrated piece in this defense, and he's been super productive. He's had a lot of big games, and he had a big game against Iowa in particular. And I definitely think that Alexander, with what their defensive line is doing, and Karlaftis taking up a lot of blocks, a guy like Alexander could thrive in this game. We know that Wisconsin loves to run the football, so a good performance for him is definitely going to be critical for if they want to win this football game.
And, Jalen Alexander is one of hashtags HussamsHotshots. I'm just going to go ahead and coin that term. We have to watch Ches Malushi, Jake Ferguson, Tyler Beach, Caden Lyles, Keanu Benton, Sam March, and all the linebackers, along with Scott Nelson. But if you're looking at Purdue, it's not a lot of people. You have, of course, Alexander, Tyler Witt, David Bell, George Karlaftis, and Christopher Jefferson. Do you think there might be an unnoticed name for the Boilermakers today?
No, I think that list is definitely is fair for where you've put it, because the 2 names that I'm always going to be paying attention to for Purdue are David Bell and George Karlaftis. That was why they won last week against Iowa, because they stepped up and they both had really big games. If they're going to win this football game, it's going to be on the same effort. It's going to be because they both stepped up and made big plays in key moments. So Karlaftis and Bell are still going to be the big ones for me.
So who wins? What's the score prediction?
So if I'm just looking at the line on this game, if I'm betting, I'm not touching that 40-point line. That's not a very good betting line. But frankly, I'm picking Purdue. I think that Purdue is in a good spot to run the table. They just beat Iowa, as we've been talking about. But I think that's an indication that if they play a good defensive day, they can win another game back to back. For context, Purdue played Notre Dame really closely, and Notre Dame completely blew out Wisconsin. So I think that's an indication that this could be a fist fight. This could be a close one. But I'm gonna go with Purdue by a close margin. I think it's probably gonna hit the over, but give me like 24 to 14 in this one.
Ooh, 24-14 Purdue. Brandon, who do you think will win today? And will it be on that money line or that over-under?
So this is definitely a game I'm not really touching. I don't really ever touch Wisconsin or Purdue games because you feel like Wisconsin should have beat Michigan and they got absolutely blown out. And you really honestly felt like Wisconsin should have beaten Notre Dame, and we saw how that game folded. I'm honestly going to take Purdue in a close one. I'm going to take Purdue 21, Wisconsin 19. Kind of like a low defensive battle type game. Who doesn't like low defensive type battle games when it comes to Big Ten football?
I know I love them. I love them as well. And Brandon, we got to talk about a little bit of this rivalry matchup out in South Bend, USC versus Notre Dame. Man, the line right there is Notre Dame -6.5.
When I watch Notre Dame, and I'm going all the way back from even their season opener when they just edged out Florida State. I mean that game to open the season was that was a masterful game to watch. I looked at Kyron Williams. I mean, everybody honestly talks about him being a top 5, top 10 player on the defensive side of the football coming into this 2022 draft. But Notre Dame's tight end, I mean, that guy really, if
Michael Mayer.
whichever team drafts him, I mean, you're getting a legit tight end who can literally make plays. He honestly reminds me of a Travis Kelce, a Rob Gronkowski, just a tight end who's really always just a tight end who's always dependable, a tight end who's always going to be there for you, a tight end who's always going to make plays on a consistent every down basis. It's kind of funny, Hussam, that you didn't add NC State, Miami, because these two teams.
Oh, we'll talk about them later. Don't worry.
But I'm going to take Notre Dame, honestly, just because I've watched them more. I mean, I honestly really don't watch that much USC because, Pac-12 after dark, those games used to come on around the East Coast about 10:30, 10:45. And I'm usually sleeping before halftime. So, yeah, I really don't know much about USC. But I love Jack Cohn, I love Matt Mayer, and I love Kyron Williams. So, give me Notre Dame. Obviously, they won't be in the college football playoff this year like we've seen them in recent past. I'll take Notre Dame 27-20.
So, look, the Fighting Irish, they're coming off a bye, which means they're healthy across the board. Defensively, the Trojans, they have massive, massive issues along the defensive side of the ball. And not only that, they're also fundamentally bad at tackling and being physical. So I'm going to see a Kyron Williams game where he could rush for over 200 yards. What do you think about that, Joe?
I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a game where Kyron can step up to that extent. I would love for that to happen, but the issue is Notre Dame's offensive line is still a mess. They've been dealing with injuries, and that's the reason why Kyron hasn't really been able to create anything big. He's a good running back. He's a great running back, but he's somebody who needs space to operate, and he just hasn't really had that so far this year. And on top of that, USC's defensive line isn't bad. They've got some dudes.
Drake Jackson,
I think if
for
they're
one.
going to, yeah, and I think if Notre Dame's going to win this football game, which I'm in favor of it to be more than that 6.5 point line, it's going to be because whoever's starting the quarterback and who plays the most time at quarterback is going to have a good performance.
Of course, and as we go to the USC offensive side of the ball, Drake London, he's a beast at wide receiver, and unfortunately, it doesn't even matter for that offense. London has been dominating week in and week out, but USC has trouble scoring points against average defenses, and you have a defense which has, Kyle Hamilton, Isaiah Foskin, a couple of the young studs as well. What will it take for Keaton Slovis to get this passing attack and even the offensive coordinator back to where it was last season?
Yeah, it would honestly take a lot for that passing offense to go back to what it was. The inconsistency for Slovis is the real thing that's hurting them. And you talked about Drake London, who right now one of the best college receivers in the country. Leave it at that. There's no real excuse for them not to put up big numbers and for them to be more consistent. I actually got to watch them in person a few weeks ago. I went to the Utah game, and it was painful to watch. They can't really stretch the field. I feel like they just don't have the guys to do that. And Slovis just has not really been up to the level that we were used to when he first stepped onto the scene.
So look, I predict that, they're going to try and run the ball against this Notre Dame defensive line. And they need to get Keontae Ingram and the ground game going, as they're 93rd in the nation, but a good run game helps out a pass game as well. But Notre Dame's run defense is really, really good. Is this a game where USC just has a lot of 3-and-outs, or they're just going to be taking the field goals the entire game?
Yeah, I'd be hoping so. I think that, as you mentioned, Notre Dame's defense is really stacked. They've been really shut down against some of these teams, and they, when they played against Wisconsin, they had a pretty strong day, and they were able to blow that game open towards the end. I do see that, though, potentially happening where Keontae Ingram's probably not going to be able to move the ball as effectively as he's maybe done against some weaker opponents.
And, the matchup I'm really watching is quarterback Kedon Slovis versus Kyle Hamilton. I mean, Hamilton is an absolute stud at the safety position. What would you like to see him do more of against, an average USC offense?
Yeah, well, just continue to make plays. He's facing off against an offense that has a couple pieces in it, but it's not really anywhere near the most explosive offense that he's faced this season. He's a guy that can pick off the football from all sides of the field. So just continuing to see him make those plays. He's somebody who I don't even need to really see that much more from him. I think most people are in agreement that he's pretty much proven himself as a prospect. But if they want to win, he's going to need to have a turnover like he's done in the games they've won.
So on Notre Dame's side of the ball, the hashtag HussamsHotshot include Kyron Williams, Michael Mayer, maybe Kane Madden as well. You have center guard Jarrett Patterson, Kyle Hamilton, and Isaiah Foskey. On USC side, you're looking at on the offensive side of the ball, Kedon Slovis, Keontae Ingram, Drake London, and on the defensive side of the ball, Drake Jackson and Isaiah Pola-Mao. Now, Pola-Mao hasn't really been one of the top 3 or top 5 guys at his position, but what would you like to see from him to improve his draft stock?
I mean, there's nothing that stands out to me in particular. I think that this USC team overall just needs to step up. A lot of those guys you mentioned had some pretty big hype this year, and they just in general have not really lived up to it.
Of course, and I predict Notre Dame to win this game 33-21. What are your thoughts on that?
I honestly think this game is going to be a lot more high scoring, or not high scoring, a lot bigger of a blowout than that. This USC team has very limited juice, and as we've seen in this rivalry before, there's been instances where USC has fired a coach, and then they've come in and been, thinking that they could still put up a fight. But this is probably the worst that we've seen USC in a long time. I see this being more of like a 45-21 kind of thing where they're just going to blow the door open, and it's going to be a really high scoring. Because the one thing you have to take into account is that this is a very heated rivalry. So in any opportunity that Notre Dame has to completely blow out a team, they're going to do it. They will keep their starters in until the end of the game just to do that.
So Brandon, give us your prediction. Is the -6.5 line for Notre Dame a lock for you, or they're going way over that?
I'm going to be completely honest. In college football, there really is no such thing as a lock, because it's college football. Really anything can happen. I mean, who really would have thought that Texas A&M would have upset Alabama? I'm honestly gonna maybe say that USC probably covers that 6.5. I mean, even though I did predict Notre Dame to win 27-20, again, it's college football. Anything is bound to happen. But just don't be surprised if USC covers those 6.5 points.
So we're heading over to the Rose Bowl right now, and Chip Kelly's present goes up against his past when the Ducks take on the Bruins in a Rose Bowl matchup of teams with Pac-12 title aspirations. Now, Kelly coached teams dating back to his days at Oregon are, they're at their best with a multifaceted rushing attack. Such has been the case for the Bruins, which is undefeated when running back Zach Charbonnet, who is also a brand guy for Hussam's Hotshots, eclipses 100 yards. So will Charbonnet eclipse over 100 yards against this Oregon defense, Joe?
I think it's going to be really difficult because we've seen that Oregon's defense has been the reason for their success. Kayvon Thibodeau, Verone McKinley, they've got a lot of other guys that are all over that defense that have just been huge impact players. UCLA's run game hasn't been, I think, as good as I think we were anticipating or hoping for. I don't think this would be a game for him to really pop off and explode.
So I think the biggest matchup that everybody should be watching is Kayvon Thibodeau against Sean Ryan. Sean Ryan is possibly one of the top 3, if not top 5 offensive tackle prospects of this class, and Kayvon Thibodeau, he's automatically edge 1. Will we see Thibodeau play the entire game to prove, just to test out how Sean Ryan does, since this has to be Ryan's prove-it game against one of the best edge rushers in this draft class.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why not, and that matchup is super important, I think, for not Kayvon's draft stock because he's already pretty much proven it. But if Sean Ryan goes out there and he doesn't even need to completely dominate him and shut him down, but if he has a strong performance and has some good plays against him, I would argue that is going to really help solidify him as maybe offensive tackle 2 or 3 in this class, which he's already starting to get some buzz for being that potentially.
And, for UCLA doesn't have that ground and pound team, which will maul over people, week in and week out. But Oregon's defense is pretty sweet too. And ultimately, it's going to be up to Noah Sewell to stop Zach Charbonnet in the pass game and the run game as well. Will Sewell be up to the task?
Yeah, Sewell's been a really underrated part of this defense, and I certainly think so. I think we see a lot of really good things from him so far this year. He's a younger guy. He's a really good athlete. He's going to be somebody in a couple of years when he's draft eligible. We'll certainly be talking about him as a prospect.
And Mikael Wright and Verone McKinley III, they might have a little bit of their hands full with Greg Dulcich and Mike Martinez. Now, if the Bruins want to go heavy 12-13 personnel as well, how will McKinley and Wright be able to defend them within 12 and 13 personnel and make sure they don't bite on those play action passes?
Yeah, but you talk about those two safeties that they have. They are really good in coverage, and they're also really good against the run. And I think that they're not necessarily erasers, which is tough to find in college football, but they have a lot of talent. They're very, very good in coverage. So I think that they have those capabilities to shut down or not shut down, but slow down the play action that UCLA is probably going to run in this game.
And let's go ahead and talk. Let's go into the Big 12 and let's talk about Oklahoma State versus Iowa State for a second. And this might be one of the most interesting games of this weekend in that it features the country's most surprising teams with a surprise favorite. This game has a bigger meaning now that, Texas lost to Oklahoma State last week. The winner of this game has, the best chance, statistically speaking, to meet Oklahoma in that Big 12 title game. According to ESPN's FPI, Oklahoma State would have an 81% probability to make it to Arlington. The Cyclones, they would have a 48% chance with the win. So who wins this game? And I do believe Oklahoma State is a +7 in this game.
Yeah, I think that Iowa State has really underwhelmed from what we expected from them at the beginning of the year. Everyone just assumed that they were going to be the same dominant team that they were last year. But the reality of it, there were some holes in the roster. They were facing against better opponents this year, which was going to make things super difficult. Oklahoma State has been odd because they hadn't really played anybody. And the Texas game was like a prove-it game. Like, hey, we can fight with a good team. I'm picking Oklahoma State in this one. I think that line, if it is Oklahoma State -7, that's very big for me, but I'm still going to pick Oklahoma State in this one because they're trending right now. If they are going to lose a football game, it's probably going to be to Oklahoma or one of the actual top dogs of the Big 12.
So, Brandon, Clemson has not been the same when Trevor Lawrence, was taken first overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And let's not talk about the Jaguars and the Dolphins for a hot minute. We know what's going on. We know what's going on.
Don't do it.
But
Don't do it.
DJ Uiagalelei has been a bit of a letdown, and this Clemson offense has not been the same. Now, Pittsburgh is leading the way with a -3 line, and I guess you could make an argument that Kenny Pickett might be the best ACC quarterback playing this season outside of Phil Jurkovec out of Boston College, who's out for the season. Does Kenny Pickett, solidify himself as maybe a high first rounder, low second rounder quarterback if he does well against this Clemson defense?
That's I'm glad you said if he does well against this, Clemson defense. I mean, this Clemson defense for years with Trevor Lawrence, especially, they were always a top 5, top 10 unit. It'll be interesting to see because, Kenny Pickett really hasn't been in this situation where he's been a favorite against Clemson. I mean, in, recent memories, Kenny Pickett squad, they've always been a 20, 25, even 30-point underdogs. Now
And this is somewhat of a revenge game for him too. Last year it was his worst game ever as a quarterback, and it came against Clemson. So
no, yeah, and what really attracts me about this matchup is how does Dabo Swinney, look at this knowing that his team is an underdog, really. I mean, I don't care whether if it's 2, 3, 4 points. Clemson's not known for that, right? I mean, Clemson's not known to be an underdog going into any really college football game. So is this maybe a football game that we see maybe Clemson blowing them out because they are a 2, 3, 4-point underdog, and they're going to look at this game where they're going to play ground and pound football. They're going to run literally right down Pittsburgh's throats, and DJ Udelele, who hasn't really been playing up to par this season. I don't know. I mean, me personally, I think honestly Clemson wins outright just because Dabo Swinney's used to this position. I mean, I know Kenny Pickett, and I definitely agree with you. He probably has been playing like the best ACC quarterback in 2021, but I just don't see Clemson being an underdog. I don't see Clemson losing this game. I mean, I really, really don't. I think honestly the last time that Pittsburgh knocked off Clemson, wasn't it to a game-winning field goal? I want to say like 2017 or 2016. I believe it came down to the final seconds. But Pittsburgh, in recent memory, they've been non-competitive against Clemson.
So look, Joe, the Panthers have a fantastic running game that could force the Tigers' offense to be on the bench most of the game. And against decent to somewhat good teams, Clemson's offense has struggled a little bit. So how can they get DJ Wangalele, Joe Ngata, and Kobe Pace, along with Jordan McFadden, back to where they once were last year in that quick-hitting RPO style attack?
Well, I think part of the problem that Clemson has is that they just don't have like a dynamic, explosive playmaker in that receiver group. They also don't have Travis Etienne anymore, which is hindering them. But it's a lot of big-bodied offensive targets. And it's hard to stretch a field and be able to open things up offensively if you're running the same thing all the time. So for me, that's the bigger issue is that they don't have a Cornell Powell type player that they can take top off of a defense. And when everyone knows what to expect, it's really, really holding them back.
So with the Panthers defense getting better by the week, the question becomes, can Brent Venables' defense hold down the Panthers enough to win this game?
I honestly think that they can. Pitt has not really competed against anybody that is of note to where I think that this is some prolific, untouchable offense. Yeah, they put up 70 points against UNH. That's an accomplishment, but that doesn't really net you anything when you have to play a Clemson team. And I know Clemson has been horrendous so far this year, and they've underwhelmed, and they can barely beat Syracuse, but they still have a lot more talent defensively to match up with their offense. I really do have confidence that Venables will put together a good game plan.
So, again, we're going back to #HussamsHotshots. And for Clemson, you have to look at DJ, Kobe Peace, Joe Ngata. And I believe Ngata, he might be a solid 4th to 5th round wide receiver, depending on how he does this season, along with his interviews and towards the combine. But, within the tight end position, there's not a lot of, names other than Michael Myers. So Jordan McFadden is one to watch out for. If you look at Clemson's defense, Brian Breesy is a pretty good defensive lineman. So let's speak about Brian Breesy a little bit, Joe.
Yeah, Breesy has really been really good since he came in as a freshman. He was really highly recruited, big-bodied defensive tackle. He's very, very explosive. He's got a lot of good athleticism. That is somebody who has also dealt with a lot of injuries. So the problem more with Breesy has not been the quality of play. It's just been availability. And I think in when he's eligible in the following year's class, he'll certainly be talked up as a highly draftable guy, maybe potentially the top defensive tackle in his class. But again, the problem that has really, really been hindering him and the defense overall is just availability, and he needs to get fully healthy.
Of course, and I want to ask you, maybe stir the pot a little bit in this cornerback class. Is Andrew Booth Jr. cornerback 1, or is there somebody else?
Well, the Derek Stingley is going to be in the conversation, but those injuries are obviously, again, with any prospect and you have injuries, it's going to really hurt your stock a little bit because you want somebody who's available, not somebody who's going to be constantly hurt. I think right now Andrew Booth has, because of that, is slightly ahead of Derek Stingley. This is not like 10 picks ahead. This is 1A, 1B, just based on the injury and the slight regression from Derek Stingley. But I don't think that's too much of a hot take to say that Booth right now, because of those circumstances, is probably going to be cornerback 1 in this class.
So give me a score prediction between Clemson and Pittsburgh. I have Pittsburgh winning 24-21.
I feel like that this is going to be a little bit more high scoring than that. I really do believe that Clemson's going to cover and win this football game. As bad as they've been this year, I don't see them losing another bad game like Georgia Tech. I'm going to go with, let's go 35-28 in favor of Clemson.
Oh, wow. And Brandon, what do you think?
So like I previously mentioned, I mean, I really honestly agree with Joe. I don't really see a Dabo Swinney-led squad losing and, having another letdown game. I know they really didn't play up to their, fullest potential against Syracuse, really squeaking out a victory there. But I like Clemson to easily cover, and I honestly like them to win outright. I'm going to go Clemson 31, Pittsburgh 23.
Well, of course, and let's go ahead and talk about our sponsor a little bit with BetUS. And I found something interesting if you guys are going to go ahead and bet, and it's a Saturday pay-in, a $7 pay-in tournament with Cincinnati, -28.5. The LSU Ole Miss game, that over-under of 76.5, I do think that might be a little bit of a high-scoring game as well. So go ahead, check out some of the parlays and bets on our sponsor, BetUS. And now comes the time where I'm going to bash Joe a little bit. So as you know, Dolphins fans, Xavier Howard has been injured the past couple games, and Joe thinks that he's been on the injury report and being held back because he might be trade bait for a team. And he thinks that, with the 13th pick overall right now, the Miami Dolphins will select Kaiir Elam, cornerback out of the University of Florida. Joe, just why, man? Why?
I think that there's some justification that you can put a case together for it. So Xavier Howard, we already know, is unhappy with his current situation, his contract, all that good stuff. He's at the beginning of the season, he was complaining. I think he even put out like a Twitter post or something like that. All that stuff is not a good sign for a defensive player that's supposed to be your best defensive player. I really anticipate by the trade deadline that somebody is going to trade for him, maybe over the offseason. They're losing football games right now. The only thing that makes a situation where a player is upset with his contract worse is when they're not playing well and they suck. And it's sad to say that the Dolphins right now are just not playing up to what we thought that they were. And a guy like Xavier Howard does not want to stick around for something like that. So if he's traded, he's moved on, you get your picks. Brian Flores has and the front office with the Dolphins have not really done an effective job of filling needs. So that decision for me in that mock draft to go with Kaiir Elam, yeah, it sounds obnoxious, and it sounds like, well, yeah, why would they take another corner? But if we're being realistic, like, what's stopping a front office that improperly addressed the offensive line over the last 2 years from just doing it again and saying like, oh, this really good corner is available. Should we just take him instead? I think it's definitely in play. Might not be like a lock. I'm not saying it is, but it's certainly a possibility. I would not be shocked if they pulled that or if they took another defensive player.
So, Brandon, you want to go ahead and condone that, and then I'll go ahead and give my thoughts.
I mean, yeah, to really touch on Joe's point, Xavier Howard leaving the Dolphins really, at any point, really wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this is a Miami Dolphins squad that, entering tomorrow's game versus the Atlanta Falcons, they're sitting at 1-5. They're, maybe 48 hours away from possibly falling to literally 1-6. And if they do lose tomorrow, they're probably going to fall to 1-7 because I don't see them beating Buffalo on Halloween Day either. So, I mean, for Xavier Howard to even post something like that, expressing his, frustrations and stuff, he obviously wasn't happy. I mean, I know Miami did address the contract situation. They were able to give him, obviously more money because Xavier Howard is obviously, we always like to say he is worth every penny. However, really, me personally, I haven't really seen much from him this year. I mean, I know he has been hurt. I believe he only has one interception this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe one, and I believe that only one interception came in week 2 versus Buffalo. I mean, you want to look at a true legit cornerback, you got to watch, Stephon Diggs' brother, Trayvon Diggs. I mean, this guy literally is intercepting ball after ball after ball. I mean that guy is playing like how Xavier Howard was playing during a COVID-like season last year. But it'll be interesting to see. This Miami Dolphins squad right now is, they don't even really know whether Tua Tagovailoa is going to be their franchise changing quarterback. I mean, there's rumors around this franchise whether Deshaun Watson is going to be here, and really for an organization who's really 1-5, I think they should be more focused on trying to win right now more than really. Because if you don't have a decent offensive line, I don't care whether your quarterback's Tua or Deshaun Watson. If you looked at the Cleveland Browns this past Thursday night, they had freaking Case Keenum under center. They didn't have Kareem Hunt or Nick Chubb. They had a guy named Dearness Johnson who, no disrespect to him, I believe he was undrafted. Nobody even knew his freaking name, and the man runs for over 100 yards. So if you don't have a decent offensive line, I don't care if your quarterback's Tua. I don't care if your quarterback is a proven guy like Deshaun Watson. This team is not going anywhere. So honestly, I don't really care to this point whether Xavier Howard leaves or not because there's just so many more holes on this team right now. Xavier Howard is honestly the last issue.
Well, Xavier Howard is traded. That opens up another hole for a cornerback, and I do see your point on that, Joe, a little bit. But if we're talking about just specifically mocks for right now, why would you not go Charles Cross? And I know Sean Ryan was taken with the 12th pick to the Falcons, but you have Charles Cross available as to, and maybe even Kenyon Green, who can play right tackle and is doing it now with the Aggies, and that'll help Tua Tagovailoa's development. And I honestly don't see Xavier Howard leaving this Miami Dolphins team. I know he did put out that statement in the offseason expressing his interest of being traded, but the Miami Dolphins made it work. They gave him an extra $1 million in guarantees. And look, money solves everything. Money solves everything. And they have committed to Xavier Howard that they will look to get a new deal done in the offseason. Now, you have other guys as well who might want to stay with the Dolphins, might want to get a new contract with Emmanuel Ogbah and Mike Gesicki. Jerome Baker is already locked in as well. But I don't really see Xavier Howard leaving. And the fact that, X and Byron Jones have struggled is a result of our offense's incompetence in, getting the ball down the field, protecting Tua and Jacoby and that run game. So an offensive lineman, this is my argument, helps out this offense to help out in the run game. Maybe potentially if you draft Kenyon Green, you can take Austin Jackson now, replace Kenyon Green there, and your left side with Liam Eichenberg and Kenyon Green is set for the future. You can put Kenyon Green or Charles Cross from Mississippi State onto the right side. You have Robert Hunt, either a mixture of Kenyon Green or Charles Cross there on the right side. You're set for the future on the right side as well. And you just have the center to worry about. And, even though Michael Dieter is hurt, he has made some solid improvements when he's played. And he was routinely graded as one of the highest offensive linemen for the Dolphins. So that's my argument right there. You get your protection, you get your help for Tua Tagovailoa. You set that offensive line where an undrafted guy like Savon Ahmed or a 7th rounder like Myles Gaskin is able to, get some green grass behind this offensive line. And that's my argument right there. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a fair counter argument. I think that those are the two scenarios that could play out. I don't really see anything else happening where it's either they trade Xavier Howard and then we're in this hot seat situation for the whole Dolphins coaching staff and the front office, and they might just make a desperate move if they're not in love with whatever offensive linemen are available. And they might just say, like, okay, we're going to go best available, which we sometimes tend to see with teams who are overthinking and are also defensive minded. And then the other side of things is what you talked about. They keep Xavier Howard. Maybe they turn the rest of the season around a little bit. I would hope that they have the foresight to draft an offensive lineman, because right now that is the biggest issue. They need a lineman. My perspective on this is directly related to what the New York Giants have done over the last 10 years or 5 years or so, especially under Dave Gettleman and Jerry Reese. I've been a fan of the team. I've been covering the team for 3-4 years now. And that has always happened in any draft where I've watched it and I've been like, okay, they think that they're in win now mode. They need to take an offensive lineman. They're going to take an offensive lineman. And it's always been consistently a player that they didn't really need, and they just thought that they wanted to go best available. And I'm not comparing Dave Gettleman to what the Dolphins have in their front office, but this team is eerily reminiscent to that, because you could argue, if you're the coaching staff, if you have all these linemen and they're young, you could get that argument during your scouting meetings and your pre-draft meetings of like, let's just keep developing these guys. Well, let's wait one more year before we go and draft somebody. And that's going to kill them if they do that. But it's certainly a possibility for a team to have that perspective.
It is, Joe. And look, Miami's offensive line development has regressed, and everybody has taken a sophomore slump. Austin Jackson looks legitimately worse compared to last season. Robert Hunt has taken a dive in his run block and pass block win rates as well. And Solomon Kinley is riding the bench too. So I'm not so sure if it's, the players or maybe with offensive line coaching, with the different schemes, the constant turnovers in coaching, which is hampering the players. So it's a lot of factors going into, the offensive line and the offensive ineptitude as well, which is leading to us losing games and directly impacting the defense and corners like Xavier Howard. So it is a fantastic, fantastic argument. And you do bring up a great point with Kaiir Elam as well. He can possibly be another shutdown cornerback if Brian Flores does use him well and they do draft him. So before we go, Joe, what's cooking up in the near future for you?
Nothing new on my end. We're just grinding through the football season, trying to, keep putting out great content. Stay tuned for any NFL draft and FCS football content if you're looking for that stuff.
Of course. And, everybody, thank you for watching and tuning in, and let's have a great college football Saturday. Brandon, as always, thank you for being an awesome co-host. I'm Hussam Patel signing up. Fins up, everybody. Thank you, guys.